France built the perfect defense. When the First World War ended in 1918, France was victorious. But victory had come at an unimaginable cost. Large parts of northern France had been reduced to ruins. Entire villages had disappeared from the map. Millions of French soldiers had been killed, wounded, or psychologically scarred. The generation that survived the trenches carried memories of artillery, barrages, poison gas, and endless slaughter. No battle symbolized this trauma more than Verdun. For 10 months in 1916, French and German forces fought one of the bloodiest battles in history. Hundreds of thousands died. The battlefield became a wasteland of mud, craters, shattered trees, and corpses. The lesson many French leaders drew from the war was simple. They could never allow another invasion. Germany had caused it to France before, and one day it might try again. Throughout the 1920s, French military planners searched for a solution. Germany remained the largest nation in Central Europe. Its population was greater than France's. Its industrial potential remained enormous despite defeats in the war. Many French politicians believed another conflict was only a matter of time. The question was not whether Germany would become dangerous again. The question was when. Among the strongest advocates for a defensive strategy was André Maginot, a veteran of World War One and later France's Minister of War. Maginot believed France needed a system that could stop an invasion before it reached French cities. A defensive line would buy time for mobilization and reduce the horrific casualties seen during the previous war. The proposal gained support. Construction began. What emerged was unlike anything Europe had ever seen. The Maginot Line was not a single wall. It was an enormous network of underground fortresses, artillery batteries, machine gun bunkers, observation posts, railways, communication tunnels, and defensive strong points stretching across much of France's eastern frontier. Some of the largest fortifications were effectively underground cities. Soldiers could live inside for months. The complexes contained kitchens, hospitals, sleeping quarters, power stations, ammunition depots, and command centers. Massive steel turrets could rise from reinforced concrete structures, fire artillery shells, and then disappear back underground. Everything about the project was designed to survive a modern war. Visitors were impressed. Foreign military observers praised the engineering. Politicians celebrated it as proof that France would never again be caught unprepared. The French public embraced the project. After the horrors of the First World War, the Maginot Line represented security. It represented peace through strength. It represented confidence. Year after year, more money flowed into construction. Billions of francs were invested. The line became one of the most expensive military projects in European history. By the mid 1930s, many people considered it virtually impregnable. The belief was understandable. Any army attempting a direct assault would face overlapping artillery, fire, machine guns, fortified positions, and underground defenders, protected by meters of reinforced concrete. The line became one of the most expensive military projects in European history. By the mid 1930s, many people considered it virtually impregnable. The belief was understandable. Any army attempting a direct assault would face overlapping artillery fire, machine guns, fortified positions, and underground defenders protected by meters of reinforced concrete. On paper, the system appeared nearly perfect, but every military strategy contains assumptions, and assumptions can become weaknesses. The Maginot Line was built primarily to defend against a direct attack from Germany. French planners expected any future invasion to resemble the First World War. They imagined German armies advancing toward the strongest defenses. They imagined another battle of attrition. They imagined another Verdun. Yet warfare was changing. Technology was evolving. Aircraft were becoming more important. Radio communication were improving. Motorized armies were becoming faster. A new generation of military thinkers was emerging. Among them were officers in Germany who viewed war very differently. Instead of focusing on static defenses, they emphasized mobility, space, surprise for the nation. While France invested enormous resources into fixed fortifications, German officers studied how to break through enemy positions before defenders could react. The contrast between the two approaches would eventually shape the fate of Europe. Then came Adolf Hitler. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Many French officials immediately viewed him as a threat. His speeches were aggressive. His ambitions were obvious. Germany began rearming. Treaties that had limited German military power after World War I were increasingly ignored. Each year brought new warnings. Each year brought new concerns. Yet confidence in the Maginot Line remained strong. If Germany attacked, France had prepared. If Germany invaded, the fortification would stop them. At least that was a theory. Military officers toured the defenses and reassured political leaders. Newspapers praised the line. The public believed the border was secure. The Maginot Line had become more than a military project. It had become a symbol of national confidence, a symbol of French determination, and perhaps most dangerously, a symbol of certainty. But on the other side of the border, German planners were studying maps. They understood the strength of the fortifications. They understood the difficulty of attacking them directly, and they were beginning to ask a different question. What if they simply went around them? That question would soon change the course of history, because the greatest weakness of the Maginot Line was not the concrete, it was not the steel, it was not the gun. It was the assumption that the enemy would fight the battle France expected, and in 1940, Germany would prove just how dangerous that assumption could be. The fortress everyone trusted. By the mid-1930s, the Maginot Line had become more than a military project. It had become a national belief. French newspapers described it as a masterpiece of engineering. Politicians pointed to it as proof that France had learned the lessons of the First World War. Military officers proudly guided visitors through underground tunnels, artillery chambers, and armor observation posts. To many citizens, the line seemed invincible, and in fairness, there was a reason for that confidence. The fortifications were extraordinary. Some of the largest, largest major fortress complexes extended deep underground. Electric trains moved supplies through tunnels hidden beneath the earth. Powerful ventilation systems filtered air. Independent power stations kept installations running, even if outside connections were cut. The soldiers stationed there lived in conditions that often seemed closer to underground towns than military bases. There were dormitories, medical facilities, kitchens, command centers, storage depots, communication networks, even recreation rooms. Many officers believed their men could withstand prolonged sieges while remaining operational. Above ground, armored steel turrets concealed enormous firepower. Some guns could strike targets miles away. Machine gun positions overlapped with neighboring defenses, creating deadly fields of fire. Any enemy attacking directly would face artillery, machine guns, and concrete fortifications, all working together. On paper, the system appeared almost unbeatable. Yet, military strategy is rarely decided on paper. While French engineers perfected defensive warfare, a different revolution was taking place across the border. In Germany, a new leader had emerged, Adolf Hitler. When Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, many European leaders underestimated him. Some viewed him as a temporary political figure. Others assumed international agreements would restrain Germany. Many believed another major war remained unlikely. But Hitler had very different ambitions. Almost immediately, Germany began rebuilding its military strength. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed severe restrictions after World War I. Hitler ignored them. The German army expanded. New aircraft entered production. Tank development accelerated. Factories worked around the clock. Each year, Germany became stronger. French intelligence observed these developments with growing concern. Yet, rather than reconsidering their overall strategy, many leaders found comfort in the Maginot Line. After all, what was the purpose of the fortifications if not to stop a German attack? As long as the line existed, France believed it possessed a safety net. That belief would shape nearly every major decision made during the late 1930s. Meanwhile, German military thinkers were studying a different question. They knew the Maginot Line was powerful. They knew a direct assault would be costly, perhaps impossibly costly. The French had spent years preparing for precisely that scenario. Attacking head on would mean fighting the battle France wanted, and the Germans had no intention of doing that. One of the greatest strengths of military history's most successful commanders is their ability to identify assumptions, not weapons, not armies. Assumptions, because assumptions create blind spots, and blind spots create opportunities. German planners examined maps of Western Europe again and again. Their eyes returned to a region that many French officers barely considered a serious threat. The Ardennes. The Ardennes was a vast area of dense forest, stretching across parts of Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. The terrain was difficult. Road networks were limited. The region was heavily wooded. Many military experts believed large mechanized armies could not move through it efficiently. The French certainly believed that. Their planning reflected it. The strongest sections of the Maginot Line protected areas where a traditional German invasion seemed the most likely. The Ardennes received far less attention. French commanders assumed the terrain itself served as a natural defense, but assumptions can become dangerous, especially when the enemy is willing to attempt what others consider impossible. As the 1930s progressed, Europe moved steadily closer to war. Germany reoccupied the Rhineland. Austria was the next. Czechoslovakia was dismantled. Each crisis increased tension. Each crisis demonstrated Hitler's willingness to take risks. Yet the Maginot Line remained a source of confidence inside France. Many citizens believed their country was prepared. Many officers believed Germany would eventually crash against the fortifications and fail. The line had become a psychological shield as much as a military one. People trusted it. They needed to trust it because the alternative was frightening. If the Maginot Line could not protect France, what could? Then, in September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The Second World War had begun. Britain and France declared war, yet for months, very little happened on the Western Front. The period became known as the Funny War. Soldiers waited, governments planned, armies mobilized. Across the Maginot Line, French troops watched and listened. Many believed Germany would eventually attack. When that day came, they expected the fortifications to prove their worth. But inside German headquarters, a radically different plan was taking shape. A plan that would shock the world. Instead of smashing into the strongest defenses, German commanders intended to bypass them. Instead of attacking where France was strongest, they would strike where France felt safest. And at the center of their plan stood the Ardennes Forest, a region many believed was unsuitable for tanks, a region many believed was naturally protected, a region that, within months, would become one of the most famous battlefields of the 20th century. The Maginot Line was ready. Its guns were loaded. Its soldiers were prepared. Its concrete walls stood firm. But the coming invasion would reveal a devastating truth. The greatest threat to France was not the enemy in front of the fortress. It was the enemy moving around it. The attack nobody expected. On the morning of the 10th of May, 1940, the waiting finally ended. For months, Europe had existed in a strange state of uncertainty. Britain and France were officially at war with Germany, yet little major fighting had occurred on the Western Front. Newspapers called it the Funny War. Soldiers waited behind fortifications. Generals studied maps. Politicians prepared for a conflict everyone knew was coming. Then Germany struck. As dawn broke across Western Europe, German forces launched a massive offensive against the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. To many Allied commanders, the attack seemed entirely predictable. It appeared to confirm everything they had expected. German troops were moving through Belgium, exactly as they had during the First World War. French planners had anticipated this possibility for years. Their response was immediate. Large portions of the French army, supported by British forces, began advancing northward into Belgium. The objective was clear: meet the German advance, establish defensive positions, prevent Germany from repeating its success of 1914. At first glance, everything appeared to be unfolding according to plan, but the attack, moving through Belgium, was only part of the story. The real blow was falling elsewhere, far to the south, hidden among the forests and winding roads of the Ardennes. Another German force was moving. This force contained thousands of tanks, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and some of Germany's most capable commanders. The operation was extraordinarily risky. Many military experts considered the Ardennes unsuitable for large mechanized armies. The roads were narrow, the terrain was difficult, traffic jams were almost inevitable. If Allied aircraft discovered the build-up and attacked, the offensive could collapse before it even began. Yet German planners believed the risk was worth taking because they understood something crucial. The French believed the Ardennes was safe, and that belief made it vulnerable. As German columns entered the forest, the scale of the movement was astonishing. Tank after tank rolled forward. Supply trucks stretched for miles. Artillery pieces crawled along crowded roads. Entire divisions moved through terrain many considered impassable. The operation demanded extraordinary coordination. One major traffic accident, one successful Allied air attack, one serious delay, Any of these could have disrupted the offensive, but none of them happened. The Germans kept moving, hour after hour, day after day. Meanwhile, French intelligence received reports indicating unusual German activity in the Ardennes. Some officers expressed concern, others dismissed the reports. The prevailing belief remained unchanged. No major armored force could advance effectively through such terrain. Even if the Germans attempted it, they would emerge slowly and disorganized. There would be plenty of time to respond. This assumption would prove catastrophic. By May 12, German armored units began reaching the western edge of the Ardennes. Instead of finding themselves trapped and exhausted, they emerged surprisingly intact. Now only one major obstacle remained, the Meuse River. If the Germans could cross it, they would have a direct path into the heart of France. French commanders understood the importance of the river. Defensive positions existed along portions of its banks, but these defenses were not designed to withstand the concentrated force now approaching. The Germans understood that speed was everything. Every hour mattered. If they paused too long, Allied reinforcements could arrive. If they hesitated, the entire operation might fail. The race had begun. On May 13, German forces attacked near Sedan. Aircraft filled the sky. Wave after wave of bombers struck French positions. Explosions shook defensive lines. Communication systems broke down. Confusion spread among defenders. The psychological impact was immense. Many French soldiers had never experienced aerial bombardment on such a scale. As German engineers worked frantically to establish crossings, French resistance began to weaken. Small breakthroughs appeared, then larger ones. Before long, German troops were crossing the river. The impossible was happening. The Ardennes offensive had succeeded. The Meuse had been breached, and the strongest defensive system in Europe was suddenly irrelevant. Not because it had been destroyed, not because it had been defeated in battle, but because the Germans had gone around it. At this moment, many French commanders still believed the situation could be contained. They assumed the breakthrough was limited, temporary, manageable. They did not yet understand the scale of the disaster unfolding before them. German armored divisions were not planning to stop. They were planning to drive west at maximum speed toward the English Channel, toward the rear of the Allied armies fighting in Belgium, toward a trap unlike anything seen in modern warfare. The Maginot Line remained standing. Its guns remained operational. Its soldiers remained ready. Yet events were now moving so quickly that the fortifications were becoming strategically irrelevant. The war France had prepared for was not the war Germany was fighting, and within days, that difference would bring one of the most shocking military collapses in history, because the breakthrough at Sedan was not the end of the operation, it was only the beginning. The real disaster was still ahead, the fortress that failed France. By the middle of May 1940, the situation facing France had become critical. The German breakthrough at Sedan had succeeded beyond even the expectations of some German commanders. Now the armored spearheads pushed westward at extraordinary speed. The objective was simple: reach the English Channel. If German forces could reach the coast, they would cut off the British Expeditionary Force and some of France's best armies fighting in Belgium. What followed stunned the world. German panzer divisions moved faster than almost anyone believed possible. French commanders struggled to understand what was happening. Reports arrived from the front faster than headquarters could process them. Units that were expected to hold for days collapsed within hours. Communication networks broke down. Orders became outdated almost as soon as they were issued. The speed of the German advance created confusion everywhere. This was the essence of Blitzkrieg, not merely tanks, not merely aircraft, but a combination of speed, coordination, surprise, and relentless pressure. Instead of allowing defenders time to reorganize, German forces kept moving. Every breakthrough became another opportunity. Every success created new chaos. Within days, German armored columns reached the Channel coast. The trap had closed. Hundreds of thousands of Allied troops now found themselves trapped in northern France. Among them was the British Expeditionary Force, one of Britain's most important military formations. The implications were enormous. If these troops were destroyed or captured, Britain would lose much of its professional army. The war itself might be transformed. As panic spread to Allied headquarters, emergency plans were developed. The result became one of the most famous evacuations in military history, Dunkirk. Beginning in late May, an extraordinary rescue effort unfolded. Military vessels, fishing boats, merchant ships, civilian craft, anything capable of crossing the channel was pressed into service. Under constant threat from German aircraft and artillery, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were evacuated from the beaches. For Britain, Dunkirk became a symbol of survival. For France, it represented something very different, the realization that the battle for the country was being lost. As Allied forces withdrew, German armies continued advancing. The French military still possessed large numbers of soldiers. Many units continued fighting bravely, but the strategic situation had become catastrophic. Entire defensive plans had collapsed. Command structures struggled to keep pace with events. Confidence evaporated. And perhaps most importantly, the assumptions upon which French strategy had been built were proving disastrously wrong. The Maginot Line remained intact. Its guns still functioned. Its bunkers still stood. Its garrisons were still ready for battle. Yet the war had effectively bypassed them. This is the great irony of the Maginot Line. Contrary to popular belief, the Germans did not simply smash through the fortifications. In many sectors, they never needed to. The line had been designed to stop a direct attack. Germany chose a different route. The strongest defensive system in Europe was left guarding territory the enemy had already moved beyond. The fortress had not failed because it was weak. It failed because strategy had changed. As June 1940 arrived, German armies approached Paris. Fear spread throughout the capital. Government officials prepared to leave. Civilians packed belongings and fled south. Roads filled with refugees. Families abandoned homes. Vehicles clogged highways. Entire communities attempted to escape the advancing front. Then came the moment few French citizens had imagined possible. Paris was declared an open city. On the 14th of June 1940, German troops entered the French capital. The fall of Paris sent shockwaves around the world. One of Europe's great powers had been defeated in just weeks. Only a short time earlier, many observers believed France possessed the strongest army on the continent. Now the country stood on the brink of collapse. Days later, the French government sought an armistice. The campaign was effectively over. Germany had achieved one of the most astonishing victories in modern military history. The numbers remain difficult to comprehend. A nation that had spent years preparing for war. A nation protected by enormous fortifications a nation determined never to repeat the mistakes of the First World War, had fallen in approximately 6 weeks. Meanwhile, the soldiers, stationed inside the Maginot Line, watched events unfold with disbelief. Many fortresses remained operational. Many had never been seriously assaulted. Some continued resisting even after France itself had surrendered. Their situation was surreal. They had prepared for years to fight Germany, yet the war had passed around them. Eventually, most were ordered to cease resistance, not because their defenses had been destroyed, but because the nation they were defending had already fallen. And so, the Maginot Line entered history not as a symbol of engineering failure. The fortifications themselves were remarkably effective. Many performed exactly as designed. Instead, the Maginot Line became a symbol of strategic failure, a lesson taught in military academies around the world, a reminder that no defense is truly secure if it is built around the wrong assumptions. The French had prepared brilliantly for the previous war, Germany for the new one. That difference changed history. Today, the phrase Maginot Line is often used far beyond military discussions. It describes any expensive solution that addresses yesterday's problem while failing to anticipate tomorrow's challenge. Nearly a century later, the story remains relevant because technology changes, weapons change, politics change, but one danger never disappears: the danger of believing that the future will look exactly like the past. France built the strongest fortress in Europe. Its engineers succeeded. Its soldiers stood ready. Its guns were loaded. Yet, when the test finally came, the battle was fought somewhere else. And that is why the Maginot Line remains one of the most fascinating lessons in military history, not because the fortress was weak, but because the world around it changed faster than anyone expected.